All right, let's get right into it. This is the Aviation Instructor's Handbook, Chapter 2, Human Behavior. So, start summarizing. What is human behavior? Human behavior is the product of everything that causes people to act in predictable ways. And it's kind of the way that we acquire skill through education experience, studying, all of that, right? So, a very complex topic, very theoretical. But that's how the book describes it. And it's characterized as just a distinct set, an individual set of physical, physiological, and behavioral features, right? So that is human behavior. Let's see. It does briefly touch on the instructor-student relationship, right? Basically saying that every student has their own style of learning. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of a Myers-Briggs test, the MBTI test. Every person is going to learn different, and knowing someone's personality type will help you tailor your teaching to the way they learn to, make the process more efficient, make knowledge transfer easier, all of that, right? And it is possible that there are mismatches between student learning type and instructor teaching type, and that is something that we need to be aware of. And knowing your own personality can also help the way you teach. So, there's something there. Now let's talk about motivation. The broad category that I would call this is goal seeking. It's the reason that we act in certain ways, and it's defined by your goals, right? So it's what prompts someone to work towards something. This basically is the core of what drives us to study, to learn, to seek out information, right? And just being book smart and just being a coordinated, organized person is not going to get you there. However, motivation, the theory, is what can push someone to learn anything. So with enough motivation, someone will sit down for a long enough time and learn the theory of it, right? We need to find what motivates the student. That's what pushes us there, right? And there's different types of motivation. We have positive and negative motivation. We, of course, want to seek out positive motivation, right? So what is positive motivation? It's just, the promise of achievement. And there's a lot of different things that a student can interpret as achievement, right? There's a lot of things that we see as achievement as an instructor, right? So, it could be financial reasons, right? Being a pilot is very lucrative, right? Social status, self-satisfaction. There's a lot of different reasons that a student can push themselves to learn, right? And so we want to foster that positive emotion, positive motivation. That's our goal. However, there is a time and a place for negative motivation. Overconfidence is what's cited in the book, I would agree. Basically, maintaining a safe environment by maybe there's someone that is overconfident with like impulsivity. That is a situation where I would maybe want to, push the hazardous attitude talk and maybe employ some negative motivation learning tactics, but frankly, that's something we want to avoid, right? We always want to push someone to the next step because that's where the license is, right? That's where the check rate is. So we have positive and negative motivation. However, kind of talked about, there's different types of goals that people will seek out that motivation will push you towards, and that's being tangible or intangible. Now, intangible, that looks like, things that we can't touch, right? And so that's going to be like self and group acceptance, validation, self-image. They want to further those things that make them feel better about themselves or validate themselves to themselves, prove to themselves that they can do something. And that is perfectly fine. That is a great way to motivate yourself. Honestly, I've done it, right? We're all probably guilty of that, and not guilty, it's not a bad thing, but we've all probably done it in some way, right? And then there are tangible rewards, right? You know, that's the financial side of things. It's also kind of falls into the same self-esteem category. You know, we can feel our own self-esteem, and so that's what we want. So tangibility, right? Yeah. The other thing is that learners looking for group acceptance. That's a big thing, right? We want to push group acceptance. We want to push them to find groups that they can find resources in, but also that they can all push each other. A group of people will all push each other faster to a goal than an individual isolating themselves, right? And people have an innate desire for a safe environment, personal comfort, right? It's something a lot of instructors that don't remember is that students want a personal, an environment where comfort is prioritized, and attention can be easier to hold if this is, you know, fostered during training. That's kind of part of the intangible side. And then sometimes that tangible reward isn't immediately obvious to the learner, right? Intangibility is not just it's not just a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Yeah, intangible rewards can be a skill that you take away from a lesson, right? And sometimes we do lessons that don't have an obvious outcome, right? We do a line item that maybe is not immediately apparent to the student. And we need to make sure we need to make sure that the learner sees why we do it and how it can benefit them in the future. Because if that happens, a few things become easier, right? They're more attentive to the task that's at hand that might have not seemed, you know, reasonable or, you know, useful. And in the future, when it's time to apply that skill that they've learned, it makes it infinitely easier to develop the task that's down the line, right? So that's where that comes from. And yeah, it's just our job to explain why it's effective in the future. You know, at the end of the day, when it comes to motivation, learners are excited to learn things that they can use to their benefit. And it's not just like kids, right? Anyone that can learn, the whole point is to use it. Go figure. And so, you know, we want to learn things that we use to our benefit and ensure that even the smallest things that we teach are put to the point of the student's benefit, right? So we teach something minimal, we still want to show the student how this could apply in real life and how this could help them in a situation, right? It also just makes lessons down the line easier, right? So yeah, and then to the last point that the book makes, a favorable self-image can keep one engaged, right? If you think higher of yourself, you're going to be more engaged, right? And instructors can foster this by giving their student perceptions of reality that are based on fact, right? That has already been discussed. So that's how that works. Now let's talk about where motivation comes from. You know, people are motivated for a ton of reasons, and we need to understand that why, right? That could look like, you know, their parents were pilots. They want to be a pilot too. It could look like the money side of things. It could look like, you know, maybe it's an adult that wants to shift careers and they recognize that aviation brings a large set of skills to their lifestyle, right? That's how that works. We need to understand that so we can understand how to, for lack of a better word, weaponize their motivation into their success. And then we also need to understand that learning is not a means to an end, learning is a means to an end. It's not the end itself, which translated is the whole point is that we learn to meet goals. We do not, learning is not the goal itself, right? And we need to make sure that that's apparent, right? Sometimes when I'm training and when I'm just sitting here studying for hours on end, I feel like the whole point is just for me to finish, right? You know, I feel like the goal is for me to be done. But in reality, the goal is for me to get the next rating and to teach people, right? That's the real goal. And we need to see the sunshine on the horizon, right? So that's where motivation comes from. And then let's talk about maintaining it, right? Because, you know, a student might come in on the first day with a ton of motivation to learn and fly, but, you know, halfway through your training, and you're 40 hours in, whew, it's a grind, you might feel a lot less motivation. So that's how that works. I like to think about it as you kind of have like momentum, right? You have motivation momentum. Here, I'll scoot over this way. I guess it's right here. You have motivation momentum, and we need to, and our job as instructors is to, keep it built, right? Obviously, there's going to be ups and downs, but we need to ensure that it stays at a generally high level where they can stay focused, stay engaged, and keep themselves working toward their goals, right? We can do that by just praise, right? Praise, commenting on success, relating daily accomplishments to training. It's enough to keep someone engaged and happy about their training, right? We do need to be careful of hazardous attitudes developing by doing this, but generally, we need to maintain that motivation. Comment when skills reach different stages of development, and that looks like, you comment on success when they do the maneuver the first time alone. You comment on success when it hits ACS standards for the first time. There's different levels to it, right? And it doesn't, just because you hit a goal does not mean that the previous skill that you just learned can be forgotten, right? We need to make sure that it can be mastered in the future. We need to push them to want to master it. It's not just, oh, I have to master it. It's they want to, right? We need to push them to want to, and we can do that through scenario-based training, which we talked about in chapter 1, right? And then drops in motivation. Sometimes motivation drops, right? That's the slopes, that's the downs. It is natural for motivation to change and to fade after completion of a big achievement, right? Your first solo, you had to build up to it. It's a big goal. You do it, and then you look ahead and you have 45 more hours of training ahead of you. It's natural, right? Nothing can be done about it, but we need to make sure that we keep fostering the motivation to push the student forward. When a student is not motivated, that looks like, coming unprepared and a general more sloppiness for the caring for flight training, right? So we just need to remind learners of goals and remind them that, not every step is the same distance, right? That's how it works. So there's basically 5 steps to motivation as an instructor. Step 1, you need to discover goals of the student, right? That's step 1. We need to learn about who they are, why they're motivated, and what they want to achieve. And then as you go through flight training, we need to reward that incremental success. That is recognizing when they hit different milestones in their training. And then as they hit those milestones, you need to introduce new challenges. But that doesn't just mean, you forget step 2. That means that as you introduce new challenges, you also go back and reward and back and forth until we've hit everything that we need to for the training, right? That's the incremental success, right? And then, we also need to remind them about their goals. It's really easy to forget why you're there in the first place during flight training. It's a slog, right? So that's step 4, and it's not like this is a linear list, right? This has to happen in different orders at different times, but yeah. And we need to remind them that plateauing is normal, improvement comes from repetition and hard work, right? So those are the 5 steps for, our actions when it comes to maintaining and discovering motivation and goals within a student. All right, and then let's talk about human needs and how human needs affect motivation. First thing I want to stress is the law of readiness, right? It's not super stressed in the book, but it is brought up, and I think the law of readiness is a big thing, right? I think it is explained in future chapters, right? But we need to understand what the law of readiness is, right? So here, I'm going to go ahead and search up the dictionary definition. Okay, this is the law of readiness. Learning is only effective when a learner is physically and mentally prepared. If a student is not ready to learn, they will not learn. And we need to make sure that that's something that they are able to do, right? We are the teacher, they are the learner. We need to make sure that they can learn. And we do this by kind of assessing a hierarchy of needs. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of this by now, but it is known as Maslow's hierarchy. And it states that you cannot move on to the next step unless a person has met 100% of the previous one. And a person can achieve what they are born to do without meeting the previous step. So, personally, I do not believe that you need to complete all the steps or complete all of the requirements within a step below to go up, right? We've all gone to a flight lesson hungry and still completed it. We've all maybe not gotten enough sleep for a lesson and we've still completed it. So you do not need to meet 100% of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but it can affect performance, right? So let's go through them. At the bottom of the pyramid are basic physiological needs, right? It's just basic stuff, right? You need air, you need water, you need food, you need shelter, and you need sleep, right? We need to come to a lesson prepared with this baseline of health, and that probably sounds familiar, right? Part of that is in the I Am Safe checklist, right? It's, are you fit to fly? That's what the bottom of the pyramid looks like. Yeah, and then, once those are complete, we can move up. Security. Students have a need to feel safe, to feel protected. We need to make that environment, like we talked about a couple minutes ago, we need to create that environment where students feel like, they are safe in the aircraft. They have a safe environment for training, and learning becomes a lot easier. They have we'll go up a step, and then you hit belongingness, right? Students feel a need to belong. Everyone feels a need to belong, right? Generally, when you're in a plane, you are completely out of your normal environment, right? There's nothing like it. We know that. And we need to make sure that we make an effort to show new learners, we need to make them feel more at ease and reinforce their decision to do what they're doing, right? That's the kind of like the reminding them of their goals, right? We have esteem. Once you move up, it's self-esteem. There's two different types of esteem, internal and external. Okay, so internal esteem is the way one judges themselves, right? We have a very type A personality as pilots. That's very well known, right? We are so judgy of ourselves. We do one thing wrong, flight sucked, right? That's how it works. We can't do anything about that, but as an instructor, we need to make sure that a student recognizes that that is not true. It is not the correct way of thinking, right? We need to make sure that the internal, how you feel about yourself to yourself is corrected so that you come away with a positive reaction from flight. Every flight you should learn something and you should feel good about yourself. And even if you failed, like a task or something, you should still feel like you took something away from it to build the esteem, right? And then external esteem is just outside validation from peers, your instructor, all that. And we need to make the environment which encourages high esteem, because high esteem boosts motivation, and motivation boosts your working toward goals, which learning, right? Up a level is cognitive and aesthetic. This is the desire to know one's surroundings, right? To understand something. This is commonly described as the eureka moment. That comes from big accomplishments, right? After your first solo, I'm a pilot, right? Boom. You have these moments that, you put all of the dots together, boom. It makes you feel like you have a knowledge of your surroundings, like you have a knowledge of what's going on around you. And that directly connects to your emotions, which is subconscious, and, that fosters motivation, right? And then at the very top of the pyramid, once everything else has been satisfied, you have self-actualization, and that is the person's desire to do what they were born to do, which in this case is, fly a plane. It needs all previous needs at least satisfied, and it's characterized by a few factors. It means that you have concern over your own personal growth, you are problem and solution focused, and you are having peak experiences. It's peak, right? Now, I say that it is satisfied over for fulfilled. That's kind of me emphasizing that it does not have to be 100% to go from one level to another. That's fulfillment, right? It is 100%. I think it needs to be satisfied, which there's no great definition, there's no number, right? But you can do something having not fulfilled all of the requirements of the previous pyramid, right? That's Maslow's hierarchy. All right, I'm gonna take 3 minutes and erase this. And we're back. All right, quickly gonna go over human nature and motivation. So there are there are two systems of thought that have control over behavior and that affect decision making that we need to be aware of. We have the fast system and the slow system. It's pretty much what it sounds like, right? Fast is impulsive, it's unconscious, it's automatic, and it's emotional, right? It's heavily based off the first thing that you think of. And I kind of like to think of this as your fast system is only as good as your best training, right? And it's our goal to be the best training, and we need to be aware that this can be a fight or flight response, generally the flight side of things, right? And then we have the slow system, which is slow, logical, deliberate, and generally has more self-control over how one acts. So we need to be aware of those. And we also need to be aware of how a student acts at different stages of their training when presented with scenarios that force them to use these two systems of thinking, right? Emergencies is a big one, because that puts the learner under the most pressure, right? And understanding these also relies on having a healthy relationship with the student, right? And then let's get on to the real meat of chapter 2, defense mechanisms. I have a horrible acronym, because that's how aviation works, right? Yeah, I have a horrible acronym for this. This is going to be DP, FDC, triple R. And this is how I remember it. I remember it as DP, departure procedure. FDC, it's a type of NOTAM, right? And then 3 R's. I don't know. Okay, so let's go through it, right? D, denial. D is denial, right? So denial is basically, it's in the word, right? It's just denial of the truth and denial that something would happen, right? Telling yourself an alternate reality of what really did. I like the example the book uses. It's a student forgot their water bottle under a rudder pedal, which could be dangerous, and the student just denies it. They say, it wasn't me, it must have been the previous student. It's a good example of denial, right? P is projection. Now, projection is blaming someone else for your issues, right? There's a lot of good examples for this, but generally, I think the book uses this one, or I've heard this one somewhere, but the example of, you just failed a practical test, you blame the examiner and not you, oh, it was a tough examiner, it wasn't me, it wasn't the way I flew, it was the examiner. It's just not a good way of thinking, right? You're gonna not want to improve your own mistakes and just keep blaming it on others. And so that's projection, right? Next up is F, that's gonna be fantasy. Now, fantasy is an interesting one because there's a lot of different ways this can manifest itself. This is basically daydreaming. Daydreaming or role playing. That's how I would describe it. And it's, you see it a lot more nowadays because it's a lot of work to become a pilot, and it's a lot easier to pretend you're a pilot than actually be one, right? thinking about it is easier than studying. That's basically what fantasy is. But I also have another example. It's Flight Simulator. It's really easy to play Flight Simulator. It's really easy to learn everything in Flight Simulator, and just sit there for hundreds of hours and play Flight Simulator. But you're never going to get the real experience if you never go out and actually do it. And the issue is, a lot of people will assume they know things because they can do it in a flight simulator. They can pretend to be a real pilot. And, there's nothing wrong with that. But, well, I should say there's nothing wrong with playing flight sim, but there is things wrong with thinking that you know how the world works when you are not motivated to go out and seek it out by studying and training, right? Next, we have displacement. Alright, and displacement is basically taking anger out on an easier target, right? If you're in front of your flight instructor and your flight instructor is critiquing you, you don't want to say something that might anger them, right? You don't want to call them out for something. But if you go to another flight instructor, let's say that you are unhappy and you go to a new flight instructor, right? And you blame your previous one for maybe mistakes that are your fault, not the instructor's fault, but your fault. And you just, oh, my previous CFI taught me that. Even if it's not true, maybe it is true, but it might not be. That's displacement, right? You're telling an easier target. I should say you're blaming an easier target for your mistakes because you're not face to face with them, right? And that will hinder your growth. It'll hinder students' growth, and we need to be careful of the way we teach so that that is not something that happens, right? Next up is compensation. This is not compensation or hire. This is kind of like an exchange in a different way. This is sweeping one error under the rug and kind of attempting to show off something that went well, right? That looks like, you come in for a landing and, oh man, you slam that shit to the ground, right? Boom, slam and go, right? But you're embarrassed about it. You tell your flight instructor, oh, but man, how about that traffic pattern? Right? You're trying to detract from the fact that your landing was bad. You're trying to distract yourself and your instructor from the fact that your landing was bad by highlighting something that was good. And that's bad because if that continues to happen, the thing that was bad won't improve because we're not focusing on it. We need to focus on our errors to improve them. Up next we have repression. Repression's an especially dangerous one. I would consider this under the right wrong circumstances to be the most dangerous, right? A repression is hiding uncomfortable thoughts in the back of your mind. And, this can be extra dangerous if someone has like a repressed fear of flying, right? Maybe they have something that was, a traumatic event from flying and they've pushed it to the back of their mind and now they want to try getting their private pilot's license. Well, when you get up in the air, that might all spill out again, right? That anxiety, that stress, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but it might all spill out again and cause a dangerous scenario for everyone involved, right? So, I would consider this one especially dangerous. There's tons of different types of repression, though, that can all come out when you place a student in any sort of tense situation, right? So, I would consider this one a very dangerous one. Up next is rationalization. All right, rationalization is pretty simple. It's just justifying unacceptable actions, right? You're convincing yourself of a truth that's harmful. you slammed it into the ground, but oh, actually that wasn't that bad. I've done worse. You know, any landing you can walk away from is a good one. Yeah, it's just not it, right? It's gonna cause you, kind of like we just talked about with compensation, it's gonna cause you to not want to improve when we really should be focusing on improving the things that are bad, right? It's pretty simple. And then lastly, we have reaction formation. All right, and reaction formation is an interesting one. This is kind of faking a belief. I got 2 examples for you. Number one, you're 10 years old and you go over to your best friend's house, and your mom tells you to be very polite at dinner, right? And your best friend's mom is serving broccoli, and you hate broccoli. Whew, you can't stand broccoli. But your mom told you to be respectful, so you look at your friend's mom and you're like, wow, thank you for this broccoli. I love broccoli. I'm gonna eat all of this. It's faking your beliefs. Now let's apply this to the flight world. Here, I'll give you another scenario. You come in and you crater your landing. Shocker, I just gave this example 4 times. And you look at your flight instructor and you're like, it's all right, I don't really care. But deep down, you're embarrassed. Your flight instructor is obviously we're gonna try and fix it, but you wanted to show off to your flight instructor that, I'm tough, I don't care, but you're hurt inside. And this, of course, leads to the same issue of that we talked about, where you don't want to fix it, you just want to, you're embarrassed to bring it up again. A tense situation for everyone involved. It's something that we need to break, right? This can't be happening. So those are the 8 defense mechanisms. Again, that's DP, FDC, RR, departure procedure, FDC, NOTAM, and 3 Rs. I sure hope someone has a better way to remember that, because that sucks. A big one too is that common sense is the best way to fix this, right? If you have a student that's telling themselves this, it's really easy to just break it by giving them common sense. It's as simple as that, right? These are dangerous. They can lead to lapses in training. They can lead to lapses in motivation. We need to prevent it. Simple as that. Okay, let's talk about learner emotional reactions. I like to call these obstacles to learning, because these are things that stop learning, not help learning. First, let's talk about anxiety. Anxiety is fear of the impending, right? Fear of something that they know will happen. However, this is something that they do not know the outcome of, right? If you know the outcome of something, you're more likely to be accepting of it, right? This is something that we don't know what will happen. We need to accept that for new pilots, you're multiple thousands of feet in the sky, and the fear of falling is a universal fear for all humans, right? We're built with it. We need to recognize that. And there's a couple of different responses to anxiety. Move this way. There's a couple of different responses to anxiety. The normal response is that you act appropriately, rapidly under the pressure, and you're more precise with how you act, right? But there's also abnormal reactions, which is freezing on when a situation arises, and maybe entering a situation that could cause anxiety, right? Any emergency is something that can cause an attack, so to speak, of anxiety, right? That is generally would be considered abnormal response. Now, this can be countered by reinforcing enjoyment of flying, right? We love flying, but it's awesome, right? Not every moment of flight training has to be something that prepares the student for something bad to happen. We have to remember that the whole point of flying is to have fun, right? We just have to teach how to be safe by emphasizing emergencies, right? We need to treat the fear as normal, right? It's okay to be afraid. We're human. However, it's not something that we need to be. We don't want to emphasize the consequences of every mistake. We just want to show like the reason we do maneuvers, the reason we do a stall is so that we can recover ourselves. And we don't want to show that if you fail to recover, you die, right? That's not something we want to emphasize. And it's generally associated with a certain maneuver. And if that's the case, break down the maneuver, right? Show the aerodynamics of it. Show how it's not dangerous if it's performed correctly. And, maybe even break it down further, right? If it's a stall, first bring it to the stall horn, right? Maybe you do it again, where you bring it to a buffeting, right? And then next you ease them into a full stall, right? It takes more time, but you'd rather have someone that's ready to learn and not afraid of what they're going to do versus someone that's fearful and unprepared for the exercise at hand. All right, let's talk about impatience. Impatience is just wanting to rush ahead. Setting your sights too far down the line. Maybe, there's a difference between studying ahead and impatience. Studying ahead is fine, but you want to make sure a student is at the same skill level as their knowledge level in terms of when they want to move on, right? So, we have to emphasize that the basics must be completed before they can move on to their solo. They have to learn how to recover from emergencies before they can just go, fly a plane for the first time alone, right? So that's what that is. It's important to master the basics before the whole task is completed, right? However, we do need to be careful we're not repeating too much, because disinterest grows when we repeat ourselves too many times. Unnecessary repetition, right? So we have to keep it to a point. Another big one is worry or lack of interest. Learners who are worried are not ready to learn. You cannot learn if you are scared. If this is from an outside force, it's not our job to do something about it. It's out of your hands, right? However, it is difficult, but we can try and divert their attention from outside troubles to the cockpit, to learning, to flying. It's possible, right? However, preventable worry, which is our job, is, part of our job, I should say, is to, I guess the best way to prevent worry is to stop it before it even happens. And that can come through a pre-flight brief, that can come through identifying expected outcomes, identifying why we need to do the maneuver, all of that, right? Anything in the plane that makes someone nervous will impede the way they learn. We need to stop that on the ground. Prevention of worry is the best cure for it. And then we have the bulk of this, which is physical discomforts. This is what I like to think of as the bottom of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it will divert attention from the task at hand. There's a bunch of different types. Air sickness is a really common one in new pilots. I know a lot of people that have gotten airsick late into their training. And frankly, if you get airsick, you're incapable of learning at a normal rate. And the book recommends terminating it at the first sign, and I honestly couldn't agree more. You're not going to learn a single thing when you feel like crap. At that point, you're just wasting money, right? Now, the cure to it is just flying, right? I think I got over my air sickness within the first 10 hours of being in the air. Everyone's different, but exposure to flying is the only thing that will fix it, right? Now, the best way to counter it is to keep a student distracted. The more stuff we can shove at them, the better. Also, cold air over the face, it helps. And what hurts, or I should say what contributes to air sickness is tension and apprehension in the cockpit. You want to have a good relationship with your student, and if you're sitting there in silence for a really long time, giving the student more things to think about is never a good solution. Even just thinking about how bad the wind is can accelerate the effects of air sickness, right? Next is fatigue. There's two types, acute and chronic. Acute is everyday fatigue, right? This is all of the compounding events of the day. It's 10:30 p.m. right now. I'm tired because I did a lot of things today, right? That's just acute fatigue. it can lead to distractibility. It can lead to, a worsening of awareness, maybe a irritability, right? But generally, it's something that resets with sleep, a nap, something like that. We need to be aware of it though, because it's obviously going to impact performance and learning. And then you have chronic fatigue, which is described as caused from not having enough time to recover from multiple episodes of that repeated acute fatigue. It's not rest related, and it has a more underlying drain in the body. And it's kind of not just a body thing or a mind thing, it's a combination of both, right? And this recovery process is not something that happens by getting a good night's rest. It's something that takes a plan, it takes time, it takes maybe a break, deliberate strategy, right? And obviously, this is not something that we can just diagnose, but it's something that we should recommend toward the learner if we assume something is happening in this area, because it will affect training. And then finally, we have dehydration and heat stroke, both two very common things in Arizona, where I'm here at. Dehydration is just the body losing water. This is a type of fatigue, actually. However, it's kind of just a causer of it, right? We fly, and at higher altitudes, the air is more dry. It dries the body out. You need to drink more water. Even if you're not feeling thirsty, drinking more water will make you feel better. And then heat stroke is the inability for the body to regulate its own temperature. It's basically comes from dehydration, right? We need to make sure that we have an ample supply of water on board. And, I think a lot of instructors just mandate a water bottle on board, right? It's a good idea, right? It's a safety of flight thing. All right, and then we have apathy due to inadequate instruction. It's not hard for a learner to recognize when their instructor is not prepared or organized. In fact, it's very easy to. I can think of plenty of times when I've had multiple instructors that haven't wanted to be there, right? I generally am not as affected by it, because as long as they're teaching me correctly and I'm getting the content, I'm satisfied. But not every student is going to be like that. As an instructor, it's your job to be there, be prepared, be on time, and show a level of professionalism with the student that allows them to engage and learn and not think that you are, a fraud, right? This kind of goes to some stuff that's in chapter 3, but we need to make sure we're getting it right the first time, not contradicting ourselves, and having a good general understanding of the content that we are presenting. If it's too complicated, or maybe if the instruction is too introductory for the student, it's ineffective. It loses the whole point. It loses their attention, because if a commercial level student is being taught private level items, why are they there? It feels like a waste of money. They're going to disengage. There's no point in teaching it. And that loses confidence. And once the confidence of a student is lost, it's very hard to regain it, right? So we just need to make sure we're teaching to the level of the learner, and also poor instruction leads to poor preparation. Makes sense. If you aren't prepared, then neither is the learner going to be, right? All right, and then finally, let's talk about stress. It's not on the board behind me, but this one's pretty short. There's two different types of, we'll say, individuals that react to stress. A normal individual responds kind of like how we do to anxiety, right? You respond rapidly, you respond precisely, and it's to the limit of your training. Again, you're only as good as your best training. And this is an automatic response, right? That's that fast thinking. And then that's just a normal individual response to stress. And that's that tolerable amount of stress we talked about in the first chapter, not an overbearing, burdening amount of stress. That's like the in the moment, right then and there stress. And then we have an abnormal reaction to stress. It can be so many different things, right? Random, illogical, but there's three major signs. It's, I don't agree with some of these, but drastic mood shifts, I agree with that, right? If you see someone really happy to be there one day and really unhappy to be there the next day, even though you're doing the same thing, might be a sign that something's a little off, right? if there's someone that has a lot of anger toward the flight instructor and you haven't been doing anything wrong, I would be concerned about that. I agree with that. And then the book also cites inappropriate reactions such as singing, painstaking self-control, or over-cooperation. I agree with some of those. That would look like, you ask a student to maintain an altitude better, and they angrily grip the controls, and they are sitting there only fixating on one instrument the whole time. Sure, right? That makes sense. You've stressed them out by giving them a altitude assignment, and they want to maintain it, but they take an abnormal reaction to it. However, singing I don't get, because I sing in the cockpit. I'm pretty sure many of us are guilty of it. I don't feel abnormal. I'll fight that one, right? But everything else makes sense to me, right? And we have to remember that as instructors, we're the only ones that see students in these high pressure environments. So we might be the first people to diagnose this. They might not know this about themselves, right? Now, we of course are not psychologists, but there's a few things we can do if we recognize this behavior and believe that it's harmful, right? A great option that the book presents is refer them to another instructor for an evaluation flight, right? And then you can decide together, you can talk together, right? Should this student stay here as a student, or I should say, should the student continue pursuing a license, and are they safe to fly? And if they are not safe to fly, you should not be endorsing them, right? You don't want to endorse someone to solo if you believe that they are a danger to themselves and others, right? So that's some things to consider. And then finally, we need to understand ourselves. We need to understand how we learn. We need to remember what we went through during our training, and that gives you insight on what the learner that you are teaching is going through, right? And then again, our actions affect how students train and learn in the future, right? We build the baseline. You're only as good as your best training. We are the training. We need to teach that, right? And then finally, the book wraps it up with teaching the adult learner. The average learner is 30 years of age. Wow. Adults are not the same as an 18-year-old student, right? They are self-directed, they are autonomous, they want to guide themselves, right? They have a lot of life experience behind them, and they know how they learn. They know how they would like to progress. They have their own schedule. We need to work around that, because if we work around that, they will be more successful, right? They take self-esteem more seriously. They are more practical. They are more relevancy oriented, right? So we need to create this pace that's more comfortable for them. So there's a few things that we as instructors should do. That is, provide a syllabus, which hopefully you have anyway, right? But we want to provide it, right? They want to work ahead, and they want to work at their own pace. So if we give them a syllabus to work on, they'll work with us, right? We want to integrate the knowledge that we give into experiences that they already have, right? We can build upon their past experiences. Recognizing that they have their own schedule that they need to maintain is important, because they probably have a different job, right? We don't want to baby them. And we need to recognize that just because they want more self-studying, as we talked about, it does not mean they want total isolation. We still need to be there for them as an adult, because we are their mentor, right? Even if we are younger than them, they're still our student, right? Our learner. So that's how that works. And we need to make sure that it's a cooperative learning environment. If they don't feel like it's cooperative, then they're not going to learn as effectively. And if we can work together on tasks instead of just assigning them tasks, they're going to apply it more to the real environment that they are in, right? So that's how that works. And that's everything. That's chapter 2. Thank you for listening to chapter 2 of the Aviation Instructor's Handbook. Hope this helped. See you.